What is writing advice? I think it can be pretty common to see people talk about writing and like the intricacies of what it is and be very direct in how they give that advice. This is not always the best thing because sometimes the way they deliver it can make us forget that it's advice. Just like any form of art, there's no like hard or fast rule to writing. It's all just trial and error. But this could be said on any sort of writing advice video. So I wanted to add a little bit more to the conversation, or at least have a very clear point that you can take away from this video and be able to apply to any of your experiences in learning how to write. Because you don't want to necessarily dismiss writing advice as, oh, there's no way that that could possibly work for me. But also, if you treat it like law, then problems start to show up.
I wrote my way out of hell. I wrote my way to revolution. I was louder than the crack in the bell.
If you take the hero's journey as law, then you start to see a lot of stories you write feel a little too similar, and you feel creatively restrictive, or you can feel that way at the very least. Sometimes that won't happen, but that comes to the point I'm trying to make, which is different advice works for different writers. Shocker. Much how like in drawing you often need to study real life anatomy and color theory and whatever artists draw. You need to do the same thing with writing. You need to understand these guidelines and these real things that are helpful to know so that you know how to break them properly. And so that's why there's so many different sorts of writing advice. It's because often writers will learn and they'll apply different pieces of writing advice they learned, and they'll come to their own conclusion and find something that works for them that they want to apply to their writing, something that works for them. This is how you get the like Dan Harmon story circle, or how you get the Save the Cat, which is like where you get your inciting incident and stuff. Or one that I really like is the Sanderson Laws of Magic, because I really like fantasy stories. And understanding why these pieces of advice work will help you understand when they're best utilized and when it's best to push them aside and let something new into the picture. Because often a lot of this advice is stuff that you just don't really think about. One little tip that I personally have in my writing is I generally do not bring dead characters back to life. But when I do, it's just as bad. This advice comes from me personally not liking when characters get resurrected in stories, because it feels like it takes away from the emotional payoff that came with their death. But if you can find a way to keep that emotional payoff running and bring them back, then I'm not as bothered. This is kind of confusing, but my favorite example of this is Jason Todd from Batman comics. But even though that works for me as a writer, it might not work for you as a writer necessarily, and honestly, it might not always work for me. I can definitely see myself breaking that rule if it's what best fits the story. I mean, if we always just listened to different types of commonalities we see in storytelling, then we would not have a lot of really impactful stories today. I mean, generally, when you first think about how writing works, you would think that you want to follow the hero of the story, the morally good person in the story. But then if that were the case, and if everybody followed that, we wouldn't have Breaking Bad, which is such an amazing show. And we wouldn't get as many stories that cover a more broad range of morality and what it means to be human. And too much dependence on this can make you even think, like, are certain stories that I really like actually bad? And I feel like specifically on TikTok, I feel like especially there, I'm seeing a lot of writing advice TikToks that are like If you don't have these 4 things in your story, then you have no story. If you don't structure your story this way, then you can't even call yourself an author. Maybe that's a little extreme, but I'm pretty sure you understand what I'm saying there. I'm pretty sure that if you're on writer, author TikTok at all, then you've probably seen that before. And often a lot of this writing advice isn't bad advice, but I just wanted to make this video so that there can be a lot of clarification to maybe people who are starting to get into writing, to just understand that it's often good to take this advice, maybe try it out, see what works about that advice, and then apply it accordingly. Me personally, I don't care about the hero's journey. I don't think it's all that important. But also I understand that I may write a story where it might be helpful to look at and decide, okay, do I want to try following the hero's journey for this story? Is that what best helps the character or the themes? The more I feel like people start to get confused about this idea of writing advice, I fear that what will happen is we'll start to see perfectly acceptable methods of writing being completely thrown out the window. For example, some people plot out their stories to the T, and some writers get an idea, get maybe a couple character ideas, and just start writing and see what happens, right? And these are both acceptable and common methods of writing, and people often end up on the middle somewhere, but that's a different video. But I fear that if we keep pretending like certain pieces of advice are essential to storytelling, we're gonna see discovery writers just get boom, taken out with a falcon punch. So I guess the moral of the story is, tell stories the way you want to tell stories, but also you've got a lot to learn.